Well, if I missed you in Bible class, good morning. It's good to be with you today. The rain is wonderful, isn't it? Everybody loves the rain. Farmers and ranchers love to talk about the rain. I think back in Noah's day, they met down at the coffee shop and they said, "Getting any out at your place?" And the guy said, "Yeah, it seems kind of general to me." So it's good that we can have the rain, good that we can share it together. One time, a young girl brought her friend with her to one of our assemblies, and she was very inquisitive. She first came in and said, "Where is your piano? Where's your organ?" "Well, we don't have one." And so she began to ask about everything that happened. "What are we doing with those crackers?" "Well, we remember that Jesus died on the cross." "Now what about that grape juice?" "Well, we remember that he shed his blood for us." And the preacher kind of ceremonially took off his watch and laid it up on the pulpit, and this little friend said, "What does that mean?" And our little girl said, "Absolutely nothing." And so I am glad to be with you today. I'd like to talk about mothers for just a few moments because it is a special day that we remember them. Let's see, brother. Let me get the line going here. Yeah, well, he did it for me. Okay. A man came home from work one day and he noticed that his three children were outside playing. They were still in their pajamas, playing in the mud, had a mess made of the whole yard. His wife's car door was open. The front door was open, no sign of the dog anywhere. He went into the entry and found an even bigger mess there. A lamp had been knocked over, and in the front room, the television was blaring loud with a cartoon channel. The family room was covered with toys, all sorts of clothing in piles everywhere. In the kitchen, the dishes were all in the sink, breakfast food spilled all over everything. The fridge door open, dog food piled on the floor, and he quickly headed upstairs thinking, "Oh my goodness, something terrible has happened to my wife." And so when he got there, he looked inside, he saw wet towels everywhere, scummy soap. Something had definitely happened there in the bathroom. He looked into his wife's bedroom, and there she was lying in bed reading a novel. And he said, "What in the world happened here today?" And she smiled and said, "You know, every day when you come home from work and you say, 'What did you do today?' She said, 'Today, I didn't do it.'" That's the way it would be if we didn't have housewives and mothers, those who take care of so many things for us on so many different occasions. Now this morning I want to look at three different scriptures and thoughts that will give tribute to mothers from whom we can learn. First of all, a mother never ceases being motherly. The verse that the young brother read for us there, and he said, "Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who has been a mother to me also." Well, the Apostle Paul said that the mother of his friend Rufus had also been a mother to him. No doubt there were concerns that Paul had in his life, like his own mother would have done to help him, and she might have cooked for him, she might have done other things for him, like any mother would do. I remember specifically growing up in Vega, Texas, and whomever we had for the preacher there, we were always, all of us children were very close to the preacher's wife. We kind of looked at her as a mother figure. One time we had a preacher there named Doyle Chapin, and all of us kids called his wife Aunt Teresa. She wasn't our aunt, that's just the way the relationship that we always had with her. Have you ever had a childhood friend that stayed at your house more than they stayed in their own home? And if so, I can promise you that your mother mothered them, just like she would for her own children. Maybe it was you that stayed at your good friend's house, and it was a matter of that mother mothering you. I think that's more specific, don't you, in the Lord's church, in the relationship that we have, and the way that we think of all of these brothers and sisters, and we're family, and so we feel that way toward those that could well be our mothers. Once a mother, always a mother. When a mother ceases to have children at home, she's still a mother. She still does motherly things, even if it's a matter of mothering other children. Did you ever have a second mother? Well, did you ever have a mother in your life whom you considered to be, or a lady in your life that you considered to be your second mom? She's my second mother. I only have one aunt still living. She lives in Vega, Texas. My mother died in 2013, and this is her sister, Jo. And Aunt Jo is still like the mother figure in my life. Debbie and I will do something nice for her on this day. We may send her flowers, we'll give her a call, and speak to her just as if she was my mother. And we would say things like, she's my second mother. She helped me be the person that I am. We love her dearly. She's an amazing woman. We thank God for mothers today, not just today, but often, who are always loving. They never stop giving. They never stop caring. They never stop mothering, even if it's not their own child. Number two, a mother teaches a child obedience. In Ephesians 6, 1 through 3, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. If children are to obey their parents, that includes whatever you call your mother, mama, mom, whatever. It's kind of cute. My grandchildren call my wife Marmy, and so that's a special word for her that she hears from them. Now, I've heard people say, my mother made me go out and cut my own switch. Well, maybe you've heard that. My daddy was kind of the disciplinarian. Didn't mean my mother didn't spank me, but she did. But so often I would hear, you wait till your daddy gets home. I dreaded my daddy getting home when that would happen. One man who is 79 years old wrote this. Mom was left with 4 children when my dad died. We were 15, 10, 8, and 2. She didn't have it easy with us. Her main discipline was a strap which could sting. Although it did us a lot of good, I learned to cry right away. Our crying seemed to make her stop. She'd often make us go to a room for time out also. If we didn't eat something she thought was good for us, we went without dessert. Usually I ate it, even though it made me gag a little because I wanted that dessert. Here's another illustration. The mother of a problem child was advised by a psychiatrist. You are far too upset and worried about your son. I suggest that you take these tranquilizers regularly. On her next visit, the psychiatrist said, well, have the tranquilizers calmed you down? Yes. Well, then how is your son now? The psychiatrist asked. And the mother said, who cares? Well, that's not what I'm suggesting when we're talking about a problem child. You know, I was telling Roger and Elaine how much I appreciated over a year ago now, can y'all believe it? They attended the funeral of my son. My son went off and he was a joy, what a guy, 39 years old, and he would say, I wasn't easy to raise, and he was not easy to raise. He came 10 years after our other children, so he was almost like an only child. Debbie said he came out of the womb saying, I want my way. Well, he turned out to be a great young man in his adulthood. But anyway, Irma Bombeck says, when my kids become wild and unruly, I use a nice soft playpen. When they're finished, I climb out of it. This guy was going through a grocery store with a little child in the cart there, and he said, don't cry, Elmer. Don't cry, Elmer. Elmer, please don't cry. And this person said, you are so patient with your son, Elmer. And he said, lady, I'm Elmer. And so it happens for us. One lady wrote, I love to play hide and seek with my kid. Some days my goal is to find a hiding place where he can't find me till he's out of high school. A mother teaches her children to obey because she's learned the lesson of obedience to parents, to God. Proverbs 10, verse 1, a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. Proverbs 13 and verse 24, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him. Now you look in the original language, and when Solomon says spares the rod, he's actually talking about something that looked kind of like a switch. When all three of my children were small, Debbie would carry this purse to church. My goodness, the thing was huge. And she would be sitting there on the pew, and I'm up preaching. And if those children of mine started misbehaving, she would kind of lean forward in the pew and hold up this switch that she had in her purse. And they would kind of sit at attention for a while and make sure they were going to obey and be nice. Proverbs 22, verse 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. Proverbs 29, verse 15, a rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Now, sometimes someone, I keep messing this up here, my brother. Someone said these insightful words to a mother: children are going to grow up, so they need to be taught to obey authority figures. Now, they're going to have a hard time following rules and having a hard time obeying their bosses, the law of the land, the government, if we don't teach them in our homes. And then they'll be saying the world is against them, and they're wondering why everyone in society wants them to obey rules and their elders. Then we will realize as a parent somewhere we failed to instill those rules in a child. You let them believe they were better than everyone, including their bosses or the government. Well, we let them believe they didn't need to obey anyone. Mutual respect is not going to work with their boss. They'll have to work and obey. It'll be hard on them because their mothers never taught them how to obey. Thank God for mothers who cared enough, loved enough to discipline their children and to make them behave and teach them respect in life. And then number 3, a mother lives a life of faith. We're familiar with 2 Timothy 1, verse 5. Paul is saying to the young preacher Timothy, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you as well. You know, when I was a little child, my mother always said, I am a junior. My dad was dean, so I'm Dean Jr. And my mother would say, Junior, you're going to be a preacher when you grow up. And I would say, no, I'm not going to be a preacher. I'm going to be a cowboy. Well, and then I met a man, some of you may have known him, a man that lived in White Deer, Texas, and his name was Ross Blassingame. He was a preacher and a really good cowboy. Ross was kind of like Jimmy, kind of like a cattle whisperer. We'd be working cattle. He'd be the only one back there bringing them in the chute. He didn't holler, hot shot, beat them. He just kind of spoke to them and kept them coming right through that chute. But anyway, so then I told my mother, okay, I'll be like Ross Blassingame. I'll be a preacher as long as I can be a cowboy also. Well, I gave up the cowboying some time ago. But here's Paul saying, you've had this from your grandmother and from your mother for all of these years now. Timothy's faith came a whole big part from his mother and his grandmother. Thank God for a mother's faith. Abraham Lincoln said, I remember my mother's prayers, and they have always followed me. They have clung to me all of my life. also writes in Proverbs 1 and in verse 8, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." One time there were four ministers that were discussing the merits of various translations of the Bible. One of them said, "Well, I like the King James Version because it's simple, beautiful English. I like to study the Psalms out of the King James. What beautiful language that is." Another says, "I like the American because it's more literal, it comes nearer to the original Hebrew or Greek." And the third preacher said, "Well, I like the New International Version the best." So the fourth minister was kind of quiet. And finally they said, "Well, come on, what's your opinion? What's your favorite translation?" And he said, "I like my mother's translation the best." And the other kind of showed surprise, and they wondered, "What are you getting at here?" And he said, "Well, my mother translated the Bible into everyday life. It was the most convincing translation I've ever saw. She made it fit my life in everything that we studied out of it." She was just an old-fashioned mother. She did not pretend to be smart. To care for her home and her dear ones was the wish that was first in her heart. We were raised the old-fashioned rules, so sparingly employed today. And when we so richly deserved it, we were spanked in the old-fashioned way. A good name is far better, she'd say, than all the wealth of the nation, and truth is best any day. She believed in the old-fashioned Bible. She trusted in old-fashioned prayer. She told us that Jesus would hear us if we'd speak anytime, anywhere. Thank God for an old-fashioned mother, for the Bible and old-fashioned prayer, for the old-fashioned faith that is looking for the Lord to appear in the air. Someone once wrote, I think Debbie has this on a plaque somewhere in our home, and it says, "Mothers hold their children's hands for a short while, but their hearts forever." God bless all of you mothers with His blessing and the blessing of those in your family. I'm glad that we have a day that we set aside and say, today we honor our mothers. We haven't said anything in our lesson this morning about obeying the Lord or about salvation, and certainly every time that I have opportunity to speak, I always do that and I always mention this is your opportunity. If you have a need for prayer in any way, something bothering you in your life, certainly if you feel that something is amiss and you need to make it right with God, that's exactly what you should do before you leave this assembly this morning. Maybe there's someone here that would like to obey the gospel, be baptized into Christ this day. Everything's ready for you to do exactly that. If you have a need to respond, don't put it off. Don't let anything hold you back. Please come right now while we stand and while we sing.